Hello and welcome back to our PolicyCast series. 9 years ago, India embarked on one of its most ambitious tax reforms with the introduction of the Goods and Services Tax. Conceived as a one nation, one tax framework, GST has transformed the country's indirect tax landscape, reshaping compliance, technology adoption, and the way businesses operate. But as GST completes 9 years, an important question remains: has it fully delivered on its promise? Or is the next phase of evolution still ahead? To discuss the journey so far, the challenges that remain, and what the future of GST could look like, we are joined by Devika Dixit, Executive Director, Brand Thornton Bharat. Welcome, Devika. My
Thank
first
you,
question
Shilpa.
to you is, 9 years into its journey, is GST closer to fulfilling its foundational promise, or does it remain a work in progress?
So, Shilpa, GST, as we all know, was introduced in 2017 on 1st of July, in fact. It has been one of the most transformative economic reforms for the country. Uh, like you mentioned, the vision was one nation, one tax, and the legislature has actually fundamentally reshaped the indirect tax landscape, and today it contributes significantly to the country's revenue ecosystem. So one of the strongest indicators of the success is the resilience of GST collections. Despite all the global economic uncertainties and the political scenario that is ongoing, collections have still remained robust, which reflects towards improved compliance, greater formation of the economy, and a steady increase and expansion of taxpayer base. So in many ways, GST has evolved from merely being a tax reform into being a critical fiscal stability pillar. Having said that, it still is a work in progress, and it is evolving every day. So businesses, as we know, have been facing some challenges around the input tax credit restrictions, which are primarily arising from maybe a supplier non-compliance or non-inclusion of any sector under GST, the classification disputes, also the high compliance intensity, and the resulting litigation because of various factors. So the government has been quite proactive, and through regular clarifications, technology enhancements, rate rationalization efforts, and introduction of various notifications, they have tried to address a lot of issues over time. But this journey towards that seamless tax regime, as we call it, it still continues. So if I have to summarize the 9 years of GST, I would say yes, it has successfully moved beyond its initial implementation and teething phase, and has delivered on scale, transparency, and of course, revenue mobilization. As we look forward to is all about enhancement, and bringing in the simplicity of the compliance framework, the technological enhancement, and of course the ease of doing business in India.
Okay. So 9 years later, GST is no longer just a bold experiment, it's a defining force. And but it has truly reached its destination, or are we still somewhere along the way? Let's dive into what the data tells us. One of the key debates today is around litigation and the interpretational issues. What have been the most persistent areas of dispute under GST? And how should policymakers address them going forward, Devika?
So litigation, it's an important stress test for any tax system. It's not just GST and not just India, which faces this particular issue. Under GST, the major disputes, as we have seen till now, they revolve around input tax credit availments, utilization, the correction of availment of the input tax credit, classification issues, valuation issues, and of course, place of supply issues. So amongst all of these, on an everyday notice, initial litigation level basis, if we see, input tax credit still remains one of the largest source of notices and pre-litigation notices which are being issued, especially wherein any taxpayer, bona fide taxpayer, they face a credit denial due to defaults of the supplier or any other system-driven mismatches. So, and along with this, the new age sectors, they are creating a different set of challenges in terms of interpretational issues. So areas such as cryptocurrency, virtual digital assets, fintech, renewable energies, digital financial services, gaming industry, they are all evolving faster than the tax framework itself, and which has also created certain uncertainty for these businesses, resulting in tax interpretation in terms of valuation or overall interpretation of the classification. So going forward, we feel that the focus should be on reducing this ambiguity before it translates into larger litigation for the players. This requires, of course, clearer legislative drafting or clarifications, faster issuance of clarity from the authorities' end, and a greater consistency in advanced rulings, along with a efficient appellate tribunal framework, which as we speak has come into play, and soon we should be seeing operational tribunals clearing these large pendency of the litigations which have been there since past 9 years. So ultimately, for a mature tax system, the reliance should not be on litigation, but it should be to provide clarity. So the goal has to be policy-led certainty, where these disputes are prevented and rather than they are being resolved at a later stage.
Understood. Because if tax certainty is the foundation of ease of doing business, then litigation is certainly the stress test. And right now, the system is clearly being tested. With the transition towards a more technology-driven GST ecosystem, such as tighter return validations and system-led compliances, how is this reshaping the risk and compliance landscape for taxpayers?
So GST has rapidly moved from a mere self-assessment model to a real-time technology-driven, compliance framework. Today, tax authorities can seamlessly verify information across GST returns, e-invoices, e-way-bills, customs records, as well as financial statements using all the advanced analytics and AI-driven tools. Not only within GST, but the system speaks to different legislations. So a lot of income tax authorities can also, reach out for information from GST portal and vice versa. So a lot of these notices that we see are being issued have information that authorities are seeking from maybe a transfer pricing perspective or maybe a direct tax perspective. So as a result, the data consistency is no longer optional. It has become a fundamental compliance requirement. A very good example of this evolution is the invoice management system, which has been implemented by enabling the taxpayers the opportunity to accept, reject, or maybe defer the supplier invoices before they translate into eligible input tax credit. The system has shifted compliance from retrospective reconciliation to a proactive credit management. This gives you a real-time opportunity to review your credit availability, and depending on your own reconciliations and to an extent having an idea about the supplier compliance basis, that you can take that informed decision whether that credit needs to be availed to avoid any sort of notice or litigation in the future. This has improved IT security, it has reduced the mismatch issues, and it has also enhanced the accountability across the supply chain. So if you see, in many ways, this IMS reflects the future direction of GST, where compliance, of course, is going to be system driven, but a real time reconciliation, availability of data, and it is going to be all around data centric. So for businesses, this of course means that compliance is no longer a periodic exercise. It is no longer optional. The risk management system has become continuous. So organizations now need to have stronger internal controls. They should have real-time reconciliations and closer integration between the tax, finance, procurement, and technology team. So all these teams which used to work independently in silos earlier, they need to start talking to each other because the data speaks together. So the positive side is, of course, greater transparency and improved fraud detection mechanism. But technology, like we say, should always remain as an enabler rather than becoming a challenge and an additional compliance burden. So the objective should be precision without excessive complexity, because it is not just large taxpayers that the system is catering to. We also need to think of ease of compliance for the smaller businesses. So in today's GST environment, like we say, success is not just about filling your returns correctly or ensuring that all your compliances are completed on time. It is about getting the data right from the very beginning of the cycle.
That's very well explained, Devika. We are moving from paperwork to algorithms, from assessment to analytics, but are businesses keeping pace with a system that never really logs off? Let's decode that shift. Looking ahead, if we were to define GST 3.0, what should be the top three priorities for policymakers to ensure GST becomes a globally competitive and business-friendly tax regime?
So I believe GST 3.0, the foundation has been laid. It is already there. It is just a matter of time that processes and law is further simplified for businesses looking to invest in India. As we see from the recommendation which came out of the 56th GST Council meeting, especially the one around rate rationalization and simplification of the tax structure, the clear signal by the government was the intent to move towards GST's next phase of evolution and trying to make it an easier tax for any business. The direction is evident, that is, we're looking for a simpler, more efficient, and a globally competitive GST framework. Having said that, I believe the three focus priorities, which may be there as next phase for policymakers, maybe the first of it being structural simplification and policy certainty. So the ongoing push towards rate rationalization has been a significant step in this direction. However, going forward, the focus may be around creating a simpler rate architecture, which can include including the excluded sectors, which is petroleum, electricity, etc., within the GST framework, and issuing, timely clarifications around the interpretational disputes before they escalate into larger litigation. So we need to have that simplification from both a policy perspective as well as a structure perspective. The second, of course, can be compliance simplification, and of course with a stronger focus for MSME players. While we talked about technology and how it has improved significantly around compliance monitoring, the compliance burden still remains quite substantial for smaller businesses. So maybe a simpler process with fewer reporting requirements and a more intuitive system that reduces that friction and would be helpful. Third can be a trust base and a more litigation efficient administration. So faster dispute resolutions through the GSTATs, better and wider use of technology enabled assessments, and maybe having few targeted amnesty measures along with a standardized litigation process may significantly improve the taxpayer confidence against the strong enforcement, and can also result in avoiding the deliberate evasion of tax that may happen. So we already have GStat procedures to start very soon, and even from a GST departmental audit perspective, if you see, there is a audit procedure which is being followed by the authorities as a base, which is similar for almost all the departments. So they are trying to bring that standardization in the processes. It would be great if we can see similar standardization across future litigation as well. So ultimately, while revenue is one of the parameters, but success of any tax, any reform cannot be measured only by the collections, but it is, I feel, more predictable by how simple, business friendly and investor friendly the system is. So the true success, I think, of GST would not be when businesses are only complying with it, which almost all of them are as of now. But when these compliances become more seamless, there is more certainty around the regulations, around the interpretational challenges, and it's more easier in terms of the overall compliance framework from someone who's outside the system looking to invest in India. If we're able to achieve giving that comfort to investors, then I believe that India's indirect tax regime at least stands to be one of the most competitive regimes in the world.
Yeah. So if GST 1.0 was about rollout and GST 2.0 was about stabilization, the big question now is, what does a future ready 3.0 GST look like? Thank you, Devika, for sharing your insights. That was quite helpful. As GST enters its 10th year, the narrative is clearly shifting from implementation to evolution, from compliance to competitiveness. The next phase will not just shape tax, but India's broader business landscape. Till then, stay informed, stay compliant, and stay a step ahead. Thank you for tuning into the PolicyCast. We'll be back soon with more conversations decoding the latest developments across trade, tax, policy, and regulation.